our session 2. This session will take place from now till 11 a.m., where we will break for coffee. Under this session, we'll be looking at the big picture, why a regional conference on improvised anti-personnel minds, and just a brief overview of what we will be discussing. It is important to note that the convention does not make distinction between factory-made or improvised minds. It also states that the states parties have agreed to strengthen efforts to stigmatize and end the use of these weapons, including new use of anti-personnel landmines of improvised nature, for which the convention strictly applies. This session, we will be looking at, among other things, efforts to identify all areas under its jurisdiction to control anti-personnel mines, ensuring effective exclusion of civilians until all anti-personnel mines contained therein have been destroyed, and fulfilling the rights and needs of those who have been fallen victims of these weapons. To help us in this session, please join me in welcome Mr. Samuel William Sebois, the Executive Secretary of the National Commission on Small Arms and Light Weapons, and Sophie Derfoli from the Implementation Support Unit as a support specialist on the Convention's Implementation Unit. Panel, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leonard. And once again, I have to welcome you to Ghana. The Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention is an instrument of international law that prohibits the development, production, stockpiling, transfer, and use of anti-personnel mines. The Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention is a pillar of international humanitarian law which seeks to address mines that cause unnecessary suffering or which have indiscriminate effects. Ghana joining the Anti-Personnel Mine Convention therefore will be added to the number of states that signed by the Anti-Personnel Mine Convention, thereby increasing the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention credibility as a strong international humanitarian law. Hosting this regional conference on Anti-Personnel Mine Convention is a testament of Ghana's strong international image and credentials as a champion of peace and development, as well as an ardent promoter of international humanitarian laws. We believe that Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention prevents states parties to deploy the use of weapons in warfare. The convention in international law is that the greater the number of state parties, the more acceptable the convention norms grow in protecting officers and personnel on peacekeeping duties, which could include officers of the Ghana Army Forces. Ghana has never produced or stockpiled, neither is she affected by the anti-personnel mines. And so joining the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention did not entail any additional cost to implement it. The objectives of the Anti-Personnel Mine Convention are like the objectives of other international instruments, such as the Convention on Cluster Munitions, among others, which Ghana is a state party. Hence, joining the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention did not impose any additional responsibilities on the country. The Anti-Personnel Mine Convention creates a forum for cooperation, assistance, which Ghana can also benefit from to improve her capability in addressing various humanitarian laws implementation challenges. The Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention provides the opportunity to exchange experience with the major military powers who are at the forefront of humanitarian and peacekeeping promotions and support operations, and the Ghana Army Force can take full advantage of this opportunity to enhance the capacity of the personnel. Ghana has made a substantial progress aligning with the provisional outline in Article 9 of the Convention and undertaking the directives specified in Action 950 of the Oslo Action Plan. These efforts underscores the nation's commitments to meeting international standards and fostering a safer environment by addressing pertinent issues related to disarmament and conventional weapons. Although Ghana is not a landmine-affected state, it stands with the presence of the explosive remnants of war, which includes outdated and excess ammunition, explosives, and bombs dating back to the World War II. Additionally, Ghana has accumulated a stockpile of explosives due to its participation in peacekeeping operations. It is crucial to highlight that the existence of these poses a substantial national security threat. In conclusion, these efforts made by Ghana signify the proactive approach to enhancing security measures and effectively managing arms in accordance with the global agreement. Emphasizing Ghana's dedication to contributing to a safer and more stable world, Ghana remains steadfast in commitment to the principles outlined in the Convention prohibiting the use, stockpiling, production, and transfer of anti-personnel landmines. The country decided to sign the Convention in December 4th, the year 1997, and subsequently ratified same on June 30th, the year 2000, showcase a firm dedication to the objectives set forth by the Convention. The effects resonance with the overreaching global goal to alleviate the profound humanitarian consequence resulting from these destructive devices and highlighting Ghana's proactive role in contributing to a safer world and the threats posed by anti-mine personnel. I will end here and I'd like my colleague to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, it's a real pleasure to be with all of you here in Accra today and for the next 2 days. I will say a few words on behalf of the Secretariat of the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention, the ISU, Implementation Support Unit. At the outset, I would like to thank the government of Ghana and their National Commission on Small Arms and Light Weapons for hosting this important regional conference. And we also thank the European Union for its support, without which the conference could not have taken place. 25 years of implementation of the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention has seen real progress to end the suffering caused by anti-personnel mines around the world. In Africa, where the convention boasts 53 states parties, efforts to address the disastrous humanitarian impact of these weapons have clearly been visible. Of the 26 African states parties which have declared being affected by anti-personnel mines, 12 have so far completed their work, releasing vast areas of land for productive use and allowing their populations to move freely and without fear. In West Africa and the Sahel region, there are, however, still 7 states parties which are mine affected. New challenges have recently emerged, caused by an increased use of improvised anti-personnel mines in recent conflicts. But we're also witnessing new use of anti-personnel mines in states that were not previously affected by mines, and this includes the use of improvised anti-personnel mines. The annual casualty rates, unfortunately, have been increasing, and they had actually been decreasing, they had been decreasing since the entry into force of the convention, and they have now been increasing. These challenges are affecting implementation and us getting to completion. The convention is not new to challenges. It's had many over the course of its history. It's had to adapt and find innovative approaches to implementation. It has always done so in a cooperative manner and it will no doubt do the same with the increasing challenges faced by some states parties in this region. For this reason, last year, the German presidency of the convention presented a paper on anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature, recording some of the challenges that affected states parties are facing and making recommendations in this regard. In particular, the presidency highlighted the need to continue raising awareness among states parties of their obligations to address the humanitarian impact of anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature within the framework of the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention, and the importance of adhering to all relevant decisions in this regard. It was also noted that many states parties affected by anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature face challenges in accessing mine-affected communities due to the presence of armed non-state actors. We need to move forward and share expertise, lessons learned, and best practices employed by those in similar circumstances. So in this regard, the conference this week is very timely. It will give an opportunity to the region to discuss the impact of improvised anti-personnel mines and how this issue can be addressed within the framework of the convention. States parties from West Africa and the Sahel region, we really need to hear from you, to hear where you've had successes, but also your difficulties in implementing the convention, as well as your requirements for assistance. As you have heard this morning from His Excellency Lee Tuch, the President of the convention, we will be convening in Cambodia to hold our 5th review conference at the end of this year. At this conference, we will be taking stock of progress that has been achieved over the last 5 years, and we will record the challenges that are still to be overcome. States parties will be adopting a new roadmap for the next 5 years based on the conclusions that they draw on the status of implementation. It is important in this regard that we hear the voices from the region. The program for the conference this week has been built around a number of key topics related to improvised anti-personnel mines. It should give ample time for discussion, presentations of your national contacts, and sharing of lessons and best practices, and we hope that these exchanges will be fruitful. This week, in this room, we have 25 states parties represented. This is very impressive. The whole West Africa and Sahel region is represented. We also have the pleasure of counting on the participation of experts from organizations, each of whom is playing a key role in supporting states in their implementation efforts. They all have experience in addressing the impact of improvised anti-personnel mines in countries that are affected by them. Their contributions will also be very valuable this week. And we look forward to hearing from the African Union and ECOWAS on the support that they can provide states in addressing the impact of improvised anti-personnel mines. And finally, as your Secretariat, the ISU, we stand ready to support all your efforts in implementing the convention and ending the suffering caused by anti-personnel mines. We look forward to hearing from you this week, and we wish you a very successful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam. And yes. And we are grateful. I think that we need to take a short coffee break, 15 minutes, coffee break, then we come back to the floor. Thank you. No? No, what is it in plan then? Should we continue? All right, oh, okay, that's fine. Good. Is he coming on board? Oh, what is it? Just follow this plan, okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Samuel William Sibwa and Sophie, for breaking the ice, giving us a big picture why a regional conference on improvised anti-personnel mines is being convened. I'm informed that we will be having the plenary session alongside coffee. So when you feel like you want some coffee, you can just step out and grab some coffee. This means that we'll move to the next session, where we'll be looking at the perspective on improvised anti-personnel mines. And I have a singular honor to invite the following personalities and distinguished delegates to the high table. Mr. Theo Bajon, Associate Researcher, Conventional Arms and Ammunition Program, the UN Institute for Disarmament Research and Global Impact of Improvised Anti-Personnel Landmines. Mr. Catherine Atkins, Research Specialist, Landmine Monitor. Pelagi Manzan Deku, the Supra-Legal Advisor, IHL Advisory Services at CRC. And Mr. Juan Carlos Ruan, Director, Implementation Support Unit on possible acquired obligations under the convention. So while we wait for all the panel members to settle, just a gentle reminder that we'll be having coffee alongside this session. So in the event that you want some coffee, coffee is served at the back. You can walk and then grab some coffee and return to your seat.
Good morning once again. Sorry for the delay for the session. I am Frank Boateng Asmani from the National Commission on Small Arms and Light Weapons. It is an honor for me to serve as a moderator for the session on perspective on improvised anti-personnel mines. Dear delegates, welcome to the first session of the first day. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this conference to discuss the critical issue of addressing the humanitarian impact of improvised anti-personnel mines in our region. We have a lot of work to do on the continent, not only on improvised mines, but also with traditional mines. In this regard, I want to welcome the panelists for this session and allow me to briefly introduce the speakers for this session. Firstly, it is a pleasure to introduce Pelagie Mazan-Dekou, who is an International Committee of Red Cross RCRC legal advisor covering West African states, Mauritania, and Chad. She is based in Abidjan and provides support to the legal advisors of the RCRC to these countries in matters of integration, promotion, and implementation of international humanitarian law. Thank you for joining us, Pelagie. We also have Catherine Atkins, who is a research specialist focusing on researching the impact of anti-personnel mines in a number of countries for the Landmine Monitor. She has worked for over a decade as an explosive ordnance disposal technician and supporting military and humanitarian mine action projects in East Asia and Africa, as well as in other areas of work. Thank you for being with us. We are also joined by Theo Bajon, Associate Researcher, Conventional Arms and Ammunition Program with the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, UNITE, where he supports the strengthening of weapons and ammunition management research and lead the improvised explosive devices. Prior to joining UNITE, he has also worked on disarmament matters around the globe, including in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you for joining us. Finally, we are joined by the Director of the Implementation Support Unit, ISU, who has been the Director of the unit for the past 8 years and has been working in the field of humanitarian demining for the past 23 years, including in mine action programs in Central and South America with the Organization of the American States. So before I offer the floor to the RCRC, I would ask that any questions you may have, kindly write or save them down for the end of the presentation, and then we will open the floor for questions and answers. Thank you for joining us, Carlos. I now give the floor to RCRC to do a presentation. Thank you. Where's the PowerPoint? Yes. Okay. No. You present from here. So I will sit, right?
Allô. Distingués participants, bonjour. Alors, avant toute chose, j'aimerais remercier les organisateurs qui nous donnent l'occasion de nous exprimer ici sur un sujet d'intérêt, d'actualité, celui des mines antipersonnelles improvisées. Alors, la question des mines antipersonnelles improvisées est une question qui date, ce n'est pas un phénomène nouveau, mais depuis un certain nombre d'années, on observe une augmentation du recours à ce type de mines dans le monde entier et surtout dans la région Afrique de l'Ouest et Sahel, ce qui, bien entendu, n'est pas sans poser certains problèmes, certains défis au respect des principes humanitaires. Alors aujourd'hui, plus que jamais, je pense qu'il est important que l'on se penche sur les défis posés par les mines antipersonnelles improvisées. Et donc, après avoir rappelé la problématique, je pense qu'il serait bien de revenir sur ces défis qui sont posés aussi bien au droit et à l'action humanitaire. Je pense que j'ai oublié. Alors, mine antipersonnelle improvisée, de quoi parle-t-on? On connaît tous, je pense, les conséquences humanitaires des mines antipersonnelles, on sait plus ou moins de quoi on parle. Il s'agit d'engins qu'on peut poser sur le sol ou à proximité et qui explosent du fait de la présence d'une personne. Et donc les mines antipersonnelles qu'on connaissait jusqu'à maintenant, c'est celles qui étaient fabriquées de façon industrielle. La différence avec les mines qu'on qualifie d'improvisées, c'est que celles-ci sont fabriquées de façon artisanale et donc généralement composées à partir de composants non militaires. Can I start now? OK. Donc, je disais donc que comparativement aux mines antipersonnelles de fabrication industrielle, les mines improvisées sont fabriquées de façon artisanale. Donc, le problème des mines antipersonnelles improvisées est un problème assez connu. On connaissait jusqu'à présent les conséquences humanitaires créées par l'usage de mines antipersonnelles industrielles. La différence avec les mines antipersonnelles improvisées, c'est que celles-ci sont fabriquées à partir de composants généralement non militaires et donc de façon artisanale. Cela cause bien entendu des problèmes. Next slide, please. Des problèmes, des conséquences humanitaires que nous connaissons tous, des morts pour ceux qui réussissent à échapper à la mort, ce sont des handicaps à vie et bien entendu les traumatismes psychologiques qui s'en suivent, des conséquences d'un point de vue socio-économique, des personnes qui n'arrivent plus à avoir accès par exemple à leur champ de culture, à avoir accès aux services de santé, donc plusieurs conséquences comme ça dans le temps. Et au-delà de ces conséquences propres, communes, je dirais, aux mines antipersonnelles, qu'elles soient de fabrication industrielle ou artisanale, nous avons des préoccupations humanitaires propres aux mines antipersonnelles improvisées, du fait notamment de l'accessibilité des composants de fabrication. Vous vous rendez compte quand on vous dit que des mines antipersonnelles peuvent être fabriquées à partir de carburant, quelque chose qui est facilement accessible par chacun d'entre nous, ou alors même de vernis à ongles qu'on peut facilement acheter dans les marchés. Donc, vous vous rendez un peu bien compte de la dangerosité de la situation. Difficulté également de distinguer entre mines anti-véhicules et mines improvisées du fait du système de la nature de l'interrupteur de mise à feu, ou alors les risques prolongés d'absence de détection de telles mines, donc difficiles à détecter du fait de leurs composants de fabrication, ou alors qui peut se disloquer facilement suite à certaines catastrophes, des inondations, des éboulements de terrain, etc. Et donc, toutes ces choses-là qui rendent difficiles les opérations de déminage. Donc voilà un peu présenter l'étendue du problème. Next slide. Next. Et donc, comme on peut s'imaginer, l'usage de plus en plus récurrent de ces mines dans les situations de conflits armés n'est pas sans créer certains défis au droit et à l'action humanitaire. Pour rappel, le droit international humanitaire, ce sont toutes ces règles qui ont été mises en place par les États justement pour limiter les effets des conflits armés, à défaut de ne pouvoir mettre un terme aux guerres dans le monde, ce qui serait l'idéal. Les États ont mis en place ces règles-là pour limiter les effets des conflits armés. Et donc, tout naturellement, ayant pour objet de limiter les conflits armés, le droit international humanitaire repose sur des principes essentiels. L'un de ces principes, c'est celui de l'égalité des belligérants. Égalité des belligérants, c'est-à-dire que tous ceux qui s'opposent pendant les guerres, voilà, qui sont en conflit, qu'il s'agit des partis non étatiques ou des groupes armés non étatiques, sont soumis aux mêmes règles, aux mêmes droits, aux mêmes obligations et doivent pouvoir les respecter. Donc, il est interdit d'utiliser des mines. Cette obligation d'interdiction-là vaut aussi bien pour les groupes armés non étatiques que pour les États qui doivent s'y conformer. Autre principe essentiel sur lequel repose le droit international humanitaire, c'est celui de la non-réciprocité, c'est-à-dire quel que soit le comportement de la partie adverse, vous êtes tenu de respecter les règles du droit international humanitaire. Aujourd'hui, nous avons une convention d'Ottawa qui interdit l'usage des mines antipersonnelles. Eh bien, les interdictions contenues dans cette convention-là s'appliquent à tous les belligérants. Et ce n'est pas parce que l'une des parties viole cette convention, notamment on disait en début de session que l'usage des mines antipersonnelles improvisées est de plus en plus le fait des groupes armés non étatiques. Bien vrai que ces groupes armés non étatiques utilisent des mines improvisées, ce n'est pas une raison également pour les parties adverses d'utiliser également ce type de mines. Donc le droit international humanitaire repose sur ces principes-là, justement parce que c'est la vie humaine qui est en jeu et cela n'est pas négociable. Next slide. Alors le droit international humanitaire, je le disais, a pour effet de limiter les conflits armés. Comment ? D'abord en protégeant les personnes qui ne participent pas ou qui ne participent plus aux hostilités. Cela implique que ces règles visent non seulement à protéger, à faciliter la protection et l'assistance aux victimes dans les situations de conflits armés, mais également encadrent la conduite des hostilités. Protéger, c'est par exemple interdire des traitements inhumains aux personnes, c'est favoriser notamment que le fait que l'assistance parvienne aux populations qui sont dans le besoin, et il y a toutes ces règles qui visent à encadrer la conduite des hostilités. Next slide. Alors quand on parle d'assistance, il faut savoir que le droit international humanitaire encadre l'assistance humanitaire, même dans les situations de conflits armés, et repose sur certains principes. Le premier principe, c'est qu'il est de l'obligation de toutes les parties belligérantes, qu'il s'agisse d'États parties ou alors de groupes armés non étatiques, d'apporter, de s'assurer à ce que leur population, les populations qui sont sous leur autorité, ne manquent de rien, même dans les situations de conflits armés. À défaut de ne pouvoir le faire, ils doivent permettre aux organismes humanitaires à caractère impartial d'offrir leurs services, notamment dans les situations que nous connaissons de conflits armés où des mines sont utilisées, où on a besoin d'organismes humanitaires, de minage humanitaire par exemple, pour accéder à des zones sous contrôle de groupes armés. Eh bien, on doit pouvoir permettre à ces organismes-là d'offrir leurs services. Et cette offre de services-là doit être analysée de bonne foi par les États. Donc, c'est soumis à consentement, mais ce consentement-là n'est pas discrétionnaire, tout simplement parce que c'est lié à l'obligation principale qui est de pourvoir aux besoins essentiels des victimes dans les situations de conflits armés. Et une fois que le consentement est donné, toutes les conditions doivent être réunies pour faciliter justement le travail des organismes humanitaires. Alors, premier défi que cela pose, bien entendu, avec l'usage de mines antipersonnelles improvisées qui sont de plus en plus difficiles à détecter. Bien entendu, vous conviendrez avec moi qu'il est encore de plus en plus difficile pour les organismes humanitaires d'avoir accès justement aux zones qui sont contrôlées par les groupes armés non étatiques et dans lesquelles ce type d'armes est utilisé. Certes, le droit international humanitaire donne la possibilité aux parties au conflit, aux États notamment, de limiter, disons, les déplacements des organismes humanitaires pour des raisons militaires impérieuses, mais cette limitation ne doit se faire que de façon temporaire, alors qu'avec l'usage des mines antipersonnelles improvisées, la question est encore plus cruciale. Next slide. Parlons de principes humanitaires. Ici, je voudrais bien marquer une pause pour rappeler les principes sur la base desquels le CICR travaille. 4 principes fondamentaux essentiels. L'humanité, bien entendu, qui est au cœur de son action, de son mandat et qui vise à soulager les souffrances humaines partout où elles se trouvent. Le principe d'impartialité également, qui doit pouvoir être respecté par tous. Le CICR travaille avec impartialité, donc on a vocation à intervenir partout où le besoin se fait sentir. On a coutume de dire l'aide la plus urgente au besoin le plus urgent. Donc là où les victimes se trouvent, là où il y a des besoins en matière d'assistance, en matière d'assistance en soins de santé, des personnes qui sont victimes de mines, eh bien le CICR doit pouvoir accéder à ces zones-là, comme bien sûr toutes les organisations humanitaires. Principe de neutralité également qui nous permet de gagner la confiance de toutes les parties. Il ne s'agit pas d'une neutralité, d'une indifférence face à la souffrance, mais cette neutralité-là nous permet de ne pas prendre part à des controverses d'ordre politique voilà, ou autre, et de gagner la confiance de tous, de toutes les parties, de façon à pouvoir accéder aux zones où le besoin se fait sentir, et bien entendu l'indépendance qui nous permet de rester autonomes dans toutes nos actions. Next slide. Nous avons également, comme je le disais, le droit international humanitaire qui encadre certains principes dans la conduite des hostilités, principes de distinction, proportionnalité et précaution, qui malheureusement aujourd'hui sont mis à rude épreuve avec l'utilisation, le recours aux mines antipersonnelles improvisées. Mines antipersonnelles improvisées qui ne permettent pas de faire la distinction entre civils et combattants. Généralement, ces mines sont posées peut-être pour attaquer les positions des parties adverses, des forces armées étatiques, mais dans les faits, on se rend compte que c'est de plus en plus les civils qui sont victimes de ce type de mines-là. Donc du coup, le principe de proportionnalité s'en trouve atteint, puisqu'on constate qu'il y a plus de victimes, de dégâts excessifs vis-à-vis des biens civils, vis-à-vis des personnes civiles, que les attaques vis-à-vis des objectifs militaires. Donc, une atteinte au principe de proportionnalité. Les précautions ne sont pas prises parce que je pense qu'il y a peu de contextes dans lesquels les civils sont avertis de l'endroit où sont posées ces mines. Et voilà. Next slide. Autre principe mis à rude épreuve par le recours aux mines antipersonnelles improvisées, ce sont des interdictions coutumières qui sont basées, bien entendu, sur le droit international humanitaire. La première interdiction, c'est celle de l'emploi de moyens et méthodes de nature à causer des maux superflus, des souffrances inutiles, en un mot, des souffrances dont on n'a vraiment pas besoin pour gagner une guerre, et de nature à frapper sans discrimination, c'est-à-dire ce sont des armes qui ne peuvent pas distinguer entre les civils et les militaires. Ici, j'ai souligné interdiction coutumière, très important. Je l'ai dit, ces armes sont utilisées de plus en plus par les groupes armés non étatiques. On peut se dire que bon, les groupes armés non étatiques ne sont pas signataires de la Convention d'Ottawa, mais justement, tous ces principes que je viens d'énoncer ont une nature coutumière. Donc, que vous soyez un État parti ou non, que vous soyez un État ou un groupe armé non étatique, à partir du moment où vous êtes engagé dans un conflit armé, vous devez respecter ces principes-là qui ont une valeur coutumière. Donc, l'intérêt de la coutume, c'est qu'elle ne tient pas compte du fait qu'un État ou qu'une entité soit ou non partie à un traité spécifique. À partir du moment où la règle est reconnue comme coutumière, elle s'applique à tous. Et donc, c'est la raison pour laquelle j'ai souligné la nature coutumière, étant donné que c'est un problème qui est souvent soulevé, mis sous le feu des projecteurs au regard de l'utilisation qui en est faite par les groupes armés non étatiques. Donc, qui cause des mots superflus qui ne permettent pas de discriminer et donc qui posent des problèmes de plus en plus récurrents par rapport au respect des principes humanitaires. Pour terminer, juste pour conclure, next slide. Juste indiquer que l'accès humanitaire doit être préservé en toutes circonstances. C'est vrai qu'aujourd'hui, les mines antipersonnelles improvisées rendent cet accès de plus en plus dangereux pour les organismes humanitaires, mais c'est un accès qui doit être préservé parce que sans cet accès-là, on ne pourra pas avoir accès aux victimes et donc les protéger et les assister tel que le droit international humanitaire le prescrit. Donc le respect des principes humanitaires, comme je l'indiquais tantôt, s'impose à toutes les parties à un conflit armé, qu'elles soient des forces armées étatiques ou des groupes armés non étatiques. Voilà les quelques éléments que je souhaiterais spécifier en début de session par rapport au respect des principes humanitaires qui sont aujourd'hui mis à rude épreuve, en espérant que ce problème puisse être réglé, qu'on puisse trouver une solution à cette situation. Je vous remercie.
For an interesting presentation. During your presentation, you made it to understand that anti-personnel mines causes humanitarian consequences, which sometimes lead to psychological problems. You also mentioned the fact that states have put together international humanitarian law, which underscore the importance of the convention. Also, IACL provides humanitarian assistance to armed conflict. And you mentioned the fact that there are 4 principles. That is humanity, impartiality, mutuality, and provision of assistance. And in an armed conflict, and in an armed conflict, provision of assistance must be followed. Thank you very much. Now allow me to offer the floor to the landmine monitor and research specialist to provide an overview of research they have carried out on the impact of improvised mines. You have the floor, Catherine.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I'll try to bring a little bit a different perspective to the whole topic we're going to discuss over the next few days. So the landmine monitor, we are concerned in gathering as much facts as possible and represent them as accurately as possible for all of us to allow to gain a better picture of the threat of improvised mines. And this is a bit of a challenge when it comes to data collection and analysis. And I decided to put my focus on that because data collection, reporting will also be different sessions we are going to discuss over the next few days. Next slide, please. We heard already from ICC about the definition of improvised minds. However, with this slide, I would like to highlight one thing. So when we talk about improvised minds, this does not necessarily mean that they are anti-personal improvised minds, because an improvised mind can be initiated by a person or a vehicle. However, from our research, we know that most of the initiation systems, be it crush wire, be it pressure plate, are so sensitive that most of the time they can be initiated by a person. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a baseline for our research, because apart from the official reporting we get, we use a lot of open sources. And what we have from these sources, what we see is that most improvised minds are actually anti-personal minds. And therefore, most of the casualties we count as casualties from improvised minds are really also anti-personal mind casualties. This is a bit of hair splitting, but it is important because it also explains why there are sometimes discrepancies in figures and numbers. It's not without trouble when we talk about improvised minds and what exactly we mean with it. Next slide, please. So I would just like to talk a little bit about figures we gained from our research. What you see here on this infograph is quite a steep curve of casualties caused by improvised minds worldwide. And at the first sight, we could actually say, well, it doesn't look that bad. We had a peak in around 2017, but since then, casualties seems to have decreased. However, this is a bit, we need to be careful with that, because this peak was caused by conflicts, ongoing conflicts in Afghanistan, Colombia, Yemen, and Syria that made a huge peak. But then the situation changed in the country, so we also had quite a steep decrease again. However, what we also see is that over the years, the casualties from improvised minds in African countries, they continuously increase. So don't be tricked by this infograph. Overall, we can also say, or unfortunately we have to say, in the 7th consecutive year, we had most casualties from improvised minds. So we have less casualties from explosive remnants of war. We don't have as much casualties from conventional anti-personal minds, anti-vehicle minds. So this is a problem. Improvised minds cause the most casualties in recent years. Next slide, please. Just to have a bit a closer look at the statistics from 2022 and to emphasize what I just said before. So in 2022, you can see that 32 of all people killed or injured by any explosive devices were actually victims of improvised minds. So in total, 1,517 casualties. This is 2.5 times more than injured or killed by conventional anti-personal minds. One thing that's also important to note is that we recorded 504 casualties from undefined mind types. And this brings me back to what I said initially, that data collection and analysis in terms of improvised minds can be quite difficult. I'll show you a few examples later. And I emphasize this because it's important for all of us that we try to be as accurate as possible in data collection and analysis, because this gives us a real understanding of what the extent of the threat is. Next slide, please. when we look at African countries, I just wanted to give you this overview as well. So this is again statistics from 2013 to 2022. You see 2 countries in these quite dark colors, which is Nigeria and Mali, with the most casualties from improvised mines. You also see the list on one side of the slide with all the other countries we recorded casualties from improvised mines. Again, this list may not be complete. It just includes whatever information we get and whatever information we consider as being casualties from improvised mines. Next slide, please. We heard it earlier this morning as well. So as of October 2023, we have at least 24 states parties worldwide of the Mine Ban Treaty who are believed or of which we know that they have improvised mine contamination. Of these 24 countries, 10 still need to confirm that they have a contamination with improvised mines. Amongst them also African countries. You see them on the map marked in the light pink. That's where we recorded casualties. That's where we have reports of improvised mines found, but there is no official acknowledgement of a contamination with improvised mines. Next slide, please. So from the casualty side, I would like to move to the side of what we in the mine action world call land release, so survey of areas contaminated with improvised mines, clearance of areas, and disposal of improvised mines. And that's where it starts to become really difficult. You see that in 2022, states parties worldwide destroyed 50 times more conventional anti-personnel mines than improvised mines. And this is a fact that stays with me because we see on one hand we have so much more casualties from improvised mines, but on the other side, to deal with the impact, there seems to be an imbalance. Of course, on the positive side, we can also say this is maybe the reason why we now have much less casualties or much fewer casualties from conventional anti-personnel mines. But you see, there, given the threat and the extent of the threat, there is certainly something we could all improve in just forcing the disposal of improvised mines. On the other side, you see again the African map with the 2 countries in purple who reported to us the disposal of conventional anti-personnel mines and also improvised mines, and the other countries in orange, of which we know that there is disposal of conventional anti-personnel mines. Again, this is not something which is exclusive. Maybe other improvised mines were destroyed in other countries, but we simply don't know, or it was reported in a way which was not very clear that we are talking about improvised mines. Next slide, please. When it comes to the release of contaminated areas, so clearance, not only a disposal of one item, but the clearance of an area, it becomes really difficult to get an idea of the extent of contamination with improvised mines. So for 2022, it was reported to us that 219 square kilometers of mine-contaminated land, including improvised mines, was released. So we simply don't know how much of this area is a contamination with improvised mines. Next slide, please. So just to give you a few examples, and also for the next few days to raise your awareness a bit, that we have to be quite clear in what we're talking about. These are some information we get. When you look at the first example, around 1st March 2023, an IED planted by insurgents detonated, injuring approximately 8 people. It's difficult, you know, is that now, were there improvised mines, approximately 8 people? Was it 2 people or 10 people? Second example, on 25th February 2023, 2 people died as a result of the detonation of an explosive device. What explosive device? You know, it could have been a remnant of war, could have been an anti-vehicle mine. Is it an improvised mine? So you see how difficult it is to come up with figures who show us what the problem is and how big the problem is. Next slide, please. Also, once more to emphasize, when we talk about contamination and clearance of contaminated areas, these are reports or figures we get, you know. We identified 2 square kilometers of mine-contaminated areas, including improvised mines, IEDs, and anti-personnel mines. There's a lot of room for interpretation in these. Or the second example, we cleared 3 and something square kilometers of anti-personnel mine-contaminated land, including improvised mines, and then we cleared other land with IEDs. And during this task, different things were destroyed, but in which task? You see, it's very difficult to come up with reliable data from such reports. Next slide, please. So this presentation and what I just talked about is part of why I'm very excited to be here with you, and I very much look forward to the discussions we have the next few days, because I would like to better understand what is your challenge, you know, in understanding the threat, and what is your challenge in reporting the threat. And I hope that we have time to discuss together how we can do that best. And why? Not because we all have fun with it, but because it would help us to gather a much better understanding of what we have to deal with. And when we gain that understanding, we will also find better options to really reduce the impact from improvised mines. Thank you very much.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation, Catherine. I picked some few points. You mentioned the fact that Landmine Monitor 2023, it reports that according to the global data of all explosive items, improvised mines kill or injure highest number of people annually for the 7th consecutive year. You also mentioned the fact that in 2022, over 32% of the people killed or injured by mines or explosive remnant of war were victims of improvised mines, and the statistics was about 1,517. Your presentation also highlighted the fact that as of October, at least 24 state parties of the Mine Ban Treaty are believed or known to have improvised contamination. I think this statistic was echoed by our Excellency the Vice President this morning. And then lastly, your presentation highlighted challenges, concerns, and lessons learned. Thank you once again for your presentation. Now allow me to offer the floor to UNIDO to provide an overview of their research into the impact of improvised anti-personnel mines.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot to the moderator of this session. I would also like to extend my thanks to the organizers for the invitation to this timely conference. I would like to give on this one a complementary perspective to what was done just before, and particularly on the work that Unity has been doing in the field since its inception in the 80s, but also most recently since 2015, and through the mandate that the United Nations General Assembly, so all states, gave us, particularly on improvised explosive devices from this assembly. Next slide, please. Very quickly, I'd like to acknowledge as well our donors, the Republic of France, the Foreign Affairs Office of Germany, and also the Australian government, and also our cooperation in support to the ECOWAS Commission, but that will be also discussed later tomorrow and in the day after, and also all our UN partners as well as non-organizations, stakeholders. Next slide, please. So I won't go into detail about this one because I think the previous presentation discussed about that. So please, next slide, and I will be giving some of the global impacts of anti-personal mines of an improvised nature. The use of improvised mines by non-state armed groups, as you've seen, has been rising, particularly in conflict zones since the beginning of the century, coinciding particularly with the global spread of information on IED manufacturers within these groups. Their use has been extensively accelerated in conflicts part of Africa, Asia, Middle East, but also Latin America, and in some instances in Europe. Victim-activated improvised mines are banned under the Mine Ban Treaty. However, some non-state armed groups have refused to hold their use, and sometimes their effect cannot be distinguished, as mentioned before, from factory-made landmines. Next slide, please. So Day2, non-state armed groups, are adapt quickly, particularly to all countermeasures that are both on the upstream prevention side and also on the downstream measures. Improvised victim-activated mines are using more sensitive fuels that are reacting to very light pressures, and this is particularly impactful in terms of civilians and children as well. Mine action programs sometimes struggle to keep up with these challenges, with survey and clearance that are much more difficult because of a lack of technical data on the ever-evolving threat, and particularly in terms of the designs. Risk education as well contains some challenges, particularly regarding the understanding of the motivations that are behind that, and as well as the location specifically, and the methods that are used by perpetrators. Strengthening international cooperation to address this threat is quite important through national policy, border management, and joint responses across conflict that is crucial to counter this growing impact of improvised landmines. Next slide. So this is a map of Africa with several incidents, not only including improvised landmines, but also all types of IEDs. And I'll go very quickly into some of these hotspot areas. So please, next slide. As you can see, we have particularly the conflict in the three border area between Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. We have some remaining items from the Casamance conflict. We also have most recently, particularly in the Ambazonian, in the Anglophone Cameroon parts, and also the Lake Chad Basin. And as you can see as well, more and more in Central Africa Republic. And please, next slide. And we can also see that trend going in DRC, particularly, and also in Southern Africa, but I've not made the zoom, and we can see also hotspots in Somalia. Next slide, please. So very quickly on this one, as you know, the APMBC prohibits all anti-personnel mines without distinguishing between manufactured and improvised mines. However, the broad terms IED has sometimes caused confusion in this framework, as it can refer to a range of improvised weapons that are going beyond anti-personnel mines. Certain IEDs constitute anti-personnel mines under the convention if they are, as said before, designed to explode from contact, proximity, or presence of a person, and that are capable of incapacitating, injuring, or killing one or several individuals. Even if they are all made, these IEDs have the same indiscriminate effects as manufactured mine, and state parties must of course fulfill with the convention obligations, including clearance and reporting. Next slide, please. So a bit more on these global challenges and impacts. As mentioned before by colleagues, the rising civilian casualties from these explosive devices has been quite tremendous in recent years, particularly by non-state armed group, both in states that are parts of the convention and states that are not parties. This poses a crucial challenge in terms of accurate data collection, but also response from mine action programs. I won't go into detail regarding the socio-economic impacts, but as mentioned, that can have long-term effects on the communities, particularly in addition to the loss of lives and also the physical injuries. They can deny safe access to livelihoods and also productive land for farming, but also grazing, collecting food, and also water access. So in general, they do undermine development and reconstruction efforts. Also, it is spread across borders, so it's a threat that can't be can be definitely addressed by states alone. So this is something that should also have a cross-border cooperation. Next slide, please. In the interest of time, I'll skip this one as it's also repeating some of those that have been done before. So next slide, please. So very quickly regarding the mandate that we got, and I think it will also be interesting in terms of framework for understanding the threat, but also later what can be the solutions. As I was mentioning at the beginning, we received the mandate from the General Assembly to develop a voluntary self-assessment tool and particularly a framework for assessing both upstream and downstream components of reacting to the threats. And the findings that are generated by this tool can inform the evolving threats and the perspective on that. But it can also inform national priorities for the design implementation or review of national measures, but also national and sub-regional approaches and assistance programming, of course. Next slide, please. So this is the framework of analysis, both on the preventative side, everything that is happening before an incident, and also everything on the downstream side of things after an incident. So we've been using and applying the tool and supporting that in several countries. Next slide, please. Here you have a list over the time, several countries that are in the room as well. Next slide, please. You can see them on the map, and particularly Africa has been also tremendously beneficiating and also applying this tool as it's a self-assessment tool. And since we are on the global threats and also perspective on the nature of that threat, next slide, please. Some of the insights that we gathered. Next one. Next one, please. Yes. So some of the global impacts and threats that are posed by improvised landmines that we gathered from the use of the Unity Counter ID capability maturity model and self-assessment tool. First, the widespread nature of the problem. These devices are used by armed groups in many ongoing conflicts worldwide, but it has also emerged in other instances, and particularly in terms of criminal activities. The evolving tactics and complex networks. The design and development constantly adapts to changes in terms of environments, and the production and operation often involves transnational networks. One particularly interesting trend that we've seen is also in terms of the downstream side of things, some double attacks that were conducted by non-state armed groups, particularly targeting first responders. So, for example, there is one explosion, then the first responders goes to the site, and there's a second landmine that is waiting for them. Human cost that indiscriminately endangers civilian as well as military and security forces, and there's a significant loss of life and injury that has been caused over the past decade. Next slide, please. It also undermines development and recovery with contamination that prevents safe access to livelihoods and basic services, as mentioned before. And also, there's a diversion of national resources that may be potentially used for development priorities that now goes into the security priorities because of the growing threats. There's also a growing complexity in terms of response. that threat needs to have an holistic whole of society approach because it is rooted politically and socially within the context of the conflict. So to be addressed, it's not just a security perspective, but it's much more a global perspective on the threat. The national capacity as well, building must cover multidisciplinary prevention and response measures and not only focusing on responding to the threat. So we also need to go a step ahead and think about that before it happens. And finally, the coordination of global action is critical at the multilateral but also regional level because of the diverse and transnational threats. As I was mentioning, since the threat is usually transnational, no state can address this alone. The knowledge exchange is particularly important and consistent support to critically curb the proliferation. And finally, monitoring evolving dynamics have also strengthened appropriate responses. Next slide. Very quickly, just to mention the research priority and contributions that we are aiming to do moving forward. So I showed you an example of the map where we've been using the tool. So that will be an online website as well for states to showcase how they've been using the tool. Then we'll do also a comprehensive review of the Counter IED self-assessment tool. And compile also all lessons learned from the use of the tool to also see how the evolving threat is going and what are the good and effective practices that have been put in place by states. And finally, also exploring at the multilateral level how cooperation frameworks can be enhanced and how cooperation globally can be better done by everyone. Next slide, just to mention some of the tools that we have. I was mentioning the Counter IED tool, but we also have in application of the, mandated as well by the UN Security Council. We've been developing technical guidelines to prevent terrorists from acquiring weapons, and that includes as well IEDs, and some other resources as well in terms of international framework that we've been working on in 2015 to have a better global cooperation on the issue. Thanks a lot, everyone, and that's all for me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bajo, for a wonderful presentation. Just some few points that I picked. The use of improvised mines by non-state actors group is now on the increase, which is a very key, important point that we must note. The need to strengthen international cooperation to address the threat of these devices. You also mentioned state parties must fulfill all the convention obligations, such as clearance under Article 5, and then reporting under Article 9 of the convention. Your presentation also highlighted that anti-personnel mines are currently used in many armed groups around the world. And finally, you mentioned the fact that there is coordination of action under this convention. Thank you once again for the presentation.
Okay.
Okay. Now I would like to invite the Director of the Implementation Support Unit to address us on the convention and the obligation of state parties. Carlos, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Frank. I want to thank all of you for being here, and I'm looking very much forward to this afternoon when we will hear from you. Because that's key for us. If I could next, I think actually there's see if this works. It does not, the clicker. Okay, next slide, please. This is going to be a bit of a rodeo because I have a lot of clicks here, so leave it there is perfect. So you've heard a lot of speakers talk about the link between improvised explosive devices and anti-personnel mines. So an anti-personnel mine is defined by the convention as a mine designed to be exploded by the presence, proximity, or contact of a person, and that will incapacitate, injure, or kill one or more persons. I think it's one of the important facts here is that the idea of an improvised anti-personnel mine was considered during the negotiations of the treaty in 1997, when one state asked the question, what if someone puts a tripwire to a grenade? And the states parties agreed that this was the definition was general enough to capture this type of device. The states parties during the negotiation also said that what we're talking about here is an effect-based definition. If it has the effect of an anti-personnel mine, then it is an anti-personnel mine. You can call it what you want. You can call it a pineapple, you can call it a truck, you can call it, but if it's detonated by the presence or proximity of a person, it is in effect an anti-personnel mine. So if you just click one more time, this was captured or reminded as well in 2017 by the states parties when they mentioned that the obligations under Article 5 are independent of the type of anti-personnel mine emplaced, manufactured, or of an improvised nature. One more. This was also captured in the 2019 Oslo Action Plan when the states parties indicated that anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature, states affected by these, will ensure that they apply all the provisions and obligations under the convention. So this is something the previous speakers have driven home, and I think it's very important to recognize that. So what does this mean? We know very well what the impact of this weapon is. If you could click one more time. So the impact on the individual, we know very well. I won't go into it. Next slide, please. And the impact on the overall community. So there's a real humanitarian impact caused by these weapons. Next slide. So this landmine issue is not just a disarmament issue. It's very much a development issue, it's a human rights issue, it's a health issue, it's a humanitarian issue, an environmental issue, and a good governance issue. So we're not speaking here about disarmament only, we're talking about just providing a safe environment for communities to develop. So the convention really sought to give a comprehensive response to the threat posed by anti-personnel mines to the population. Next slide, please. And they do this through states parties implementing 4 core obligations. 1, pushing to universalize the Anti-Personnel Landmine Convention and its norms, to destroy all stockpiles available, to support victims, and to clear mined areas. And this is supported by a number of other treaty commitments. Next slide, next click. So cooperation assistance being a central commitment. National implementation measures, transparency, and implementation support. And we'll be speaking about a lot of these measures throughout the next days. But I want to focus here on Article 5 of the Convention. First, once a state party reports having an obligation under Article 5, that is, once it reports that it has mined areas under its jurisdiction or control, it must do 3 things. It must make every effort to identify all areas under its jurisdiction or control that are suspected or known to contain anti-personnel mines. It shall, as soon as possible, effectively exclude civilians from these areas, and this is typically done by marking and mine risk education or explosive ordnance education, and this is something that we'll discuss later in the next days as well. And then states parties will undertake to destroy all anti-personnel mines inside these areas within the period of 10 years after entry into force. So there's been a lot of understandings of what implementation of Article 5 means. One of these understandings is that all areas falling under the definition of a mined area, and that is the Convention defines a mined area as an area dangerous or dangerous due to the presence or the suspected presence of anti-personnel mines. So the job of a state party is to do everything possible to identify these areas and convert them into areas that are no longer dangerous because of the presence or suspected presence of anti-personnel mines. As I mentioned, this is independent from whether it's manufactured mine or it's improvised mines. Next. So the requirement to make every effort to identify mined areas is understood as a state party's carrying out evidence-based assessments and surveys defined and elaborated in national standards based on international mine action standards. So an evidence-based approach to designating an area as suspected or confirmed hazardous area. So, as I mentioned, the state's parties have convinced, and you'll hear the word evidence-based quite a lot. So it's evidence-based, non-technical survey, technical survey, and clearance in Article 5, again, based on national standards that are drafted based on international mine action standards. So this is where the clicking gets a bit out of control. So if you can just click, 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 please. So the fact is, states need to find where these mined areas are. They need to then address them. Click again, please. Click. Thank you, again and again and again. And they need to turn them into areas that are no longer dangerous due to the presence or suspected presence of mines. This is the end goal of a state party. So at the moment, there are 33 states parties that have reported having an obligation under Article 5. These countries face a wealth of, you can click, a wealth of different challenges to implementation. They face terrain challenges, they face security issues, they face development resource issues. So there's a number of issues that are faced by states in the implementation of their commitments under Article 5. So these challenges have obviously delayed implementation. As I mentioned, the deadline is to, the goal is to implement Article 5 in the first 10 years of entry into force. And the states parties that were drafting the convention, they saw this fact. They said, well, it's going to take some a little bit longer. There's going to be circumstances that they're going to face that are going to prevent this. So under Article 5, a state can submit an extension of its deadline. There's a very detailed process of how to request an extension, and the ISU, myself and my staff, is more than happy to go through it, but it goes beyond this presentation. But there is a detailed process established by the states parties to request an extension. As I mentioned, they saw this coming at the beginning because there are so many states that were so affected by anti-personnel mines. Something they did not see coming was that after 10 years after entry into force, a state that was not affected would then be affected by anti-personnel mines. This is something that a lot of states in the region face. At entry into force, there were no mines in 1999. But today, 10 years after entry into force, even 20 years after entry into force, you're faced with the problem of anti-personnel mines. So in 2012, if you could click again, in 2012, the states parties came up with a response to states that either find previously unknown mined areas or newly affected mined areas. And so the obligation for a state that finds previously unknown mined areas, like some of these states have since, I think I would mention Guinea-Bissau, Mauritania, and Nigeria are three states that have, or sorry, Mauritania and Guinea-Bissau have identified previously unknown mined areas. Or if you discover newly mined areas, as in the case of Nigeria, who has reported having an obligation now after reporting newly mined areas, a state should immediately inform states parties of their discovery. This is typically done through Article 7 reports, and we'll discuss this transparency report later in this week. And then if the state can destroy these mined areas ahead of the next formal meeting of states parties, then they should deal with it and declare completion of the task. If they cannot, and it's going to take longer, then they need to submit an extension request at that meeting of states parties. And of course, they must continue to fulfill their reporting obligations under Article 7 of the Convention. Now, as I mentioned, this is something not foreseen, I think, by the drafters in detail, that this would be the case today, unfortunately. So today, we're months away from the Cambodian, from the 5th Review Conference in Siem Reap, Cambodia. So our main task is to hear from states, and through an evidence-based process or review, if you are affected by anti-personnel mines of an improvised nature or manufactured, and have mined areas under the territory under your jurisdiction and control, then you need to decide if you have an Article 5 obligation under the treaty, and then report it accordingly in your upcoming Article 7 reports. The deadline for Article 7 reports are April 30th, and so that's the opportunity to put all information that you have on the presence or suspected presence of anti-personnel mine in mined areas. So I think I will leave it there, and we will give it back to Frank, and we look forward to sitting with you and having this discussion with you over the next 3 days. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director of the ISU, for a wonderful presentation. Mr. Carlos briefly gave us a definition of Article 2 under the Convention. He also gave a reflection of Article 5, i.e. the implementation of the Convention. And then he touched on the Oslo Action Plan, which was adopted in 2019. He then mentioned the fact that humanitarian impact of improvised anti-personnel. He mentioned that there is an impact, humanitarian impact of improvised anti-personnel mines, sorry. And then you touched on universalization, stockpile destruction, victim assistance, mine clearance, among others. Lastly, you mentioned that state parties with Article 5 obligation, you highlighted on the state parties on Article 5 obligation, and then you also delve into its implementation. Thank you so much for such a wonderful implementation. Now let me open the floor for any questions you may have, for questioning and then discussion. So the floor is open now. Thank you. I'm sorry. I will would ask that you please raise your nameplate if you have a question for the panelists. Thank you. Okay, dear Congo, you have the floor. You may proceed, dear Congo.
Bonjour à tous. Monsieur le Président, Monsieur Juan Carlos, Monsieur le Directeur, pardon, je crois que vous me connaissez très bien. Ce n'est pas la première fois que nous nous voyons. Ici, je ne devrais pas intervenir, mais j'interviens aujourd'hui avec des larmes aux yeux. Je demanderai à toute l'assistance de porter une oreille attentive pour écouter ces petits messages dont je veux vous faire parvenir ici. Tout à l'heure, Madame de CICR a parlé de l'égalité au niveau de la belligérance des partis en conflit. Mais je suis estomaqué, je suis écœuré. Ce qui se passe dans mon pays, qui est la République démocratique du Congo, en tout cas, j'ai la nette conviction, et le peuple congolais est convaincu, qu'il n'y a pas d'égalité au niveau des traitements, au niveau entre les belligérants, dont je cite ici, les Rwandais, qui est en train de nous faire la guerre par procuration en utilisant les terroristes de M23, ADF et consorts, qui nous ramènent des engins ou les mines antipersonnelles improvisées chez nous, dont le Congo n'a plus besoin de ça. Le Congo vient de passer 3 décennies de guerre. Le Congo n'a plus besoin de subir encore 4e décennie de guerre, alors que la communauté internationale, chaque fois que je passe dans les assemblées, je passe les messages. Dernièrement, les États-Unis d'Amérique ont demandé ouvertement au Rwanda d'arrêter de semer le chaos au Congo en soutenant les rebelles et les terroristes qui sèment la terreur chez nous. Et en continuant à nous semer, à nous imposer cette guerre, ils sont en train d'accroître les zones de conflit et qui engendrent encore des zones contaminées par des mines antipersonnelles et des mines improvisées. Chez nous, on n'a pas connu ça. C'est depuis l'avènement de ces terroristes que chez nous, au Congo, nous avons plusieurs zones de mines disséminées dans des écoles, dans des églises, dans des marchés. J'ose croire que dernièrement, la semaine passée, vous avez suivi des images où ces terroristes ont semé les chaos. Ils ont décapité les enfants en utilisant en même temps ces engins improvisés, donc ces mines antipersonnelles improvisées, dont même hier chez moi, dans mon pays, il y a eu des marches terribles dans les ambassades pour protester. Et mon gouvernement a pris la décision d'interdire ces marches. C'est dans des lieux comme ça qu'on pourrait passer les messages. S'il vous plaît, chez nous, au Congo et en Afrique, le sang coule dans les veines, comme le sang coule en Occident. Nous sommes en train de subir la même guerre comme se passe en Ukraine. Toute la communauté internationale donc, se focalise, cotise des millions chaque mois pour envoyer à l'Ukraine de façon à soutenir l'Ukraine à faire face à cette guerre. Mais chez nous au Congo, nous subissons la même guerre injuste, reconnue par tout le monde. On n'a aucun soutien financier pour faire face à ça. Même dans des zones que l'armée a récupérées, on n'a pas de moyens pour pouvoir passer au nettoyage et à la dépollution de ces coins-là de façon à ce que la population revienne dans toute quiétude. Je passe ces messages ici avec des larmes aux yeux. Mon cœur saigne. Je ne devrais pas être ici, mais je devrais passer quand même pour vous passer ces messages. Le Congo veut vivre comme le Togo, le Bénin, où il règne la paix, où on ne parle pas des guerres, on ne parle pas des armes improvisées, on ne parle même pas des mines. S'il vous plaît, aidez-nous. Aidez-nous. Et je lance aussi un message aussi à mes frères africains. Nous devrions nous soutenir, se tenir la main dans la main. Dernièrement, je crois, il y a 2 ans, au Tchad, il devait avoir une guerre civile. Mais mon pays, par l'entremise de mon président, son Excellence M. Félix Tshisekedi, en tant que président de l'Union africaine, a utilisé tous les créneaux. Il a fait asseoir les deux partis, les pouvoirs et l'opposition, jusqu'à aller signer un accord dont aujourd'hui l'opposant est devenu Premier ministre. Et ça nous a évité là-bas un foyer de guerre où on devait avoir des belligérances, la guerre civile qui devrait engendrer encore les tensions et les zones contaminées par des mines et autres explosifs de guerre. Mes chers Africains, emboîtez les pas à la République démocratique du Congo. Aimons-nous les uns les autres. Soutenons-nous dans des actions comme ça pour que l'Afrique vive dans la paix, qu'il n'y ait plus les foyers de belligérance, surtout pour éviter les conflits, parce que ce sont les conflits qui nous amènent les mines antipersonnelles et les engins explosifs improvisés. Donc, ces messages, chers Africains, chère communauté internationale, ne fermez plus les yeux et ne bouchez plus les oreilles par rapport à ce qui s'est passé dans mon pays. Trop, c'est trop. Trop, c'est trop. Même si ce n'est pas les lieux, mais c'est un lieu qu'on devait passer le message. Puisque ni téter les attaques, ni téter la guerre, chez nous à l'Est, on ne devrait pas avoir de mines antipersonnelles et on ne devrait pas avoir des engins explosifs improvisés. Il ne faut pas qu'on nous fasse la guerre et pas la procuration. Quand on veut traiter avec le Congo, il y a des mécanismes internationaux qui sont là pour qu'il y ait des accords signés entre mon pays et les États gagnant-gagnant où ceux qui veulent signer des accords avec nous vont se retrouver et mon peuple aussi devrait se retrouver. S'il vous plaît, trop, c'est trop. Merci beaucoup. C'était un message que j'avais à passer. Nous voulons retrouver la paix et que le Congo ne soit plus un pays qui sera contaminé parmi les pays où il y a des mines antipersonnelles improvisées. J'ai dit et je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, delegate from DR Congo. Thank you for the wonderful intervention. I don't know if any of the panelists would want to add to what he said. Okay, delegate from Togo.
Merci beaucoup. Je suis le docteur Akloa. Je suis chirurgien et venant du Togo. J'ai 2 questions. Et avant tout, je tiens à remercier les organisateurs pour l'opportunité qu'ils nous donnent de pouvoir participer à cette conférence. La première question va à Mme Catherine. J'ai porté un intérêt particulier aux résultats qu'elle nous a donnés en rapport avec les décès et ceux liés aux mines personnelles et ceux liés aux mines artisanales. La première question que j'ai à poser, les données que vous avez, qui fait la collecte des données? Est-ce les États ou est-ce les individus? Maintenant, la deuxième question par rapport à ça, avez-vous des guides qui permettent aux collecteurs, à ceux qui font la collecte de données, de pouvoir le faire de façon correcte et éviter les résultats qui sont biaisés ou éviter les données qui ne sont pas exploitables? C'est la première question. Ma deuxième question va à M. Bajor de Unidir, pour lui dire merci pour tout ce qu'il fait. Et par rapport au programme d'auto-évaluation, il a cité certains pays qui ont bénéficié de ce programme. Malheureusement, le Togo n'en faisait pas partie. Ma question est de savoir quels sont les critères de sélection de ces pays-là et quels sont les autres critères pour pouvoir bénéficier de ce programme-là. Merci à vous.
Thank you very much, delegate from Togo. I think the question goes to Catherine first before. Okay, yeah. Please start.
Thank you very much for your 2 very good questions, which I answer happily. So our first source is always an official source, be it an Article 7 report. We send out questionnaires every year to national authorities, partly also to operators acting in the country in mine action. So we try to get all this information from official sources. If this is not possible, we scan open sources, so we scan news articles, some of the examples I showed you before, and we get our information from them. We then try to triangulate them. We try to find different sources who give the same information, or we try to find someone, a government official, who can confirm that information. And this is also why I'm excited to be here, because I want to catch up with you and I want to find out who is the right person to talk to get as reliable information as possible. And to your second question, that's a very timely question. We are currently working on better guidelines to hand out with our questionnaires, which explain what information we are looking for and how it should be divided, how it should be disaggregated. There is already guidelines, but we fully acknowledge that from our end we could also give better guidelines, and we hope with that we can establish a more reliable data source overall. So a very good question, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'll give the floor to Unity to answer the question. Second question.
Merci beaucoup et merci beaucoup pour la question. J'aimerais aussi retourner les remerciements pour la collaboration avec le gouvernement du Togo que nous apprécions beaucoup. Alors pour répondre à la question par rapport à l'outil d'auto-évaluation, comme le dit le titre, c'est un outil d'auto-évaluation. Donc c'est techniquement mis en place et designé pour pouvoir être utilisé par les États eux-mêmes, donc par les commissions nationales, par les responsables, pour rassembler l'ensemble des parties prenantes. Maintenant, depuis 2020 et le lancement de l'outil, nous, UNIDIR, ainsi que plusieurs partenaires internationaux comme UNMAS, comme Small Arms Survey, ont pu supporter des États pour pouvoir mettre en œuvre cet outil d'auto-évaluation qui se base généralement sur une semaine, où on évalue l'ensemble des composantes que je montrais sur le diaporama précédemment. Donc il y a déjà eu des pays qui ont pu bénéficier de ce support. Mais de manière générale, c'est un outil qui peut aussi être utilisé par les États eux-mêmes et qui l'a fait. Et dans la liste que je présentais justement, certains États l'ont mis en œuvre par eux-mêmes dans le besoin de mettre à jour une stratégie nationale ou d'en créer une. Mais généralement, ça s'inscrit dans un processus. Quoi qu'il en soit, nous, UNIDIR, on reste disponible et vous pouvez nous contacter si vous avez besoin de quoi que ce soit par rapport ou d'informations par rapport à cet outil. Et nous pouvons également vous mettre en rapport avec d'autres parties prenantes qui pourraient éventuellement vous aider dans la limite de nos capacités également. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I now invite delegate from UNICEF.
Bonjour à tous, merci. Moi, c'est Carmel Zou, je viens de UNICEF Bénin. Mon commentaire rejoint celui du précédent participant par rapport à la collecte des données, par rapport à la fiabilité des données. J'ai été un peu surprise de voir que le Bénin est encore suspecté comme contaminé, alors qu'on sait que depuis quelques années, il y a des explosions, notamment au nord du Bénin, dans la commune de Karimama et aussi dans certaines communes du département de la Takora. Et à la date d'aujourd'hui, on a des victimes. C'est vrai que le chiffre n'est pas aussi grand qu'ailleurs. On a quand même une dizaine de personnes décédées. On a plus de 10 explosions qui ont eu lieu. Je me suis posé la question de savoir qu'est-ce que nous pouvons faire pour que les données reflètent véritablement ce que nous vivons dans nos pays. Merci.
Thank you. Hey, sorry. Thank you very much. Who is taking this question, please? Okay, Carlos, you have the floor.
Yeah, I think that one of this is, if I understood correctly, the data on mine contamination. Yeah. Well, I think one of the things is that and this will be a topic for, I don't want to get into the topic that we'll talk about in data collection and reporting, but I think the convention has developed very detailed guidelines to how to best report, and if these guidelines are followed, I think that we would get all the clarity that, that's needed. And that's important because we want the bulk of the information, or all the information, to come from states and hear directly from the states on what is affected. So there are all a number of tools, and we'd be happy to share them with you at any point. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Delegate from Burkina Faso. Then we take delegate from Ghana Armed Forces Command and Staff College.
Merci bien pour la parole. Donc, je suis le capitaine Palamfo, je suis le chef de service des mines et des explosifs à la Commission nationale de contrôle des armes du Burkina Faso. Et je suis également qualifié en intervention sur engins explosifs improvisés. Moi, ça serait plutôt une remarque par rapport donc, au rapport de transparence et concernant les recherches que nous a présentées Landmine Monitor. En fait, quand on parle du déminage, en ce qui concerne le minage, j'allais dire, des mines conventionnelles, ça obéit à des principes, ce qui n'est pas le cas pour les mines antipersonnelles improvisées dont nous voulons parler. Ça n'obéit à aucune règle et la plupart du temps, ces mines antipersonnelles improvisées sont posées sur des points donnés ou sur des axes ou au niveau des bases. Des bases, je vais parler des bases terroristes ou bien souvent des points qui sont pris par ces groupes armés non étatiques. Donc, ce qui revient à dire que quand on veut faire, j'allais dire, le rapport de transparence, il est assez difficile d'obéir à ce principe où on va parler de zones minées. Parce que ça serait peindre tout un État en rouge, ce qui n'est pas le cas, car dans ces pays, nous continuons toujours à vivre. Donc, ce qui veut dire qu'il faut revoir la façon, en fait, de faire l'approche en ce qui concerne donc ce point-là. Actuellement, nous sommes en train de travailler avec l'unité d'appui pour la mise en œuvre de la Convention pour élaborer notre rapport de transparence. Donc là, c'est pour interpeller Landmine Monitor pour dire que c'est aussi les interpeller afin qu'ils s'alignent sur ça, parce que pour nous, en tant qu'État qui n'avait pas de mines antipersonnelles conventionnelles, qui se retrouvent à faire face à ces mines antipersonnelles improvisées, d'abord la problématique elle est nouvelle, et deuxièmement, elle n'obéit pas au même principe des mines antipersonnelles improvisées. Donc ce qui revient à dire qu'en matière de collecte de données, la plupart du temps, même quand c'est sur des sources ouvertes, ou bien quand c'est donné par les forces de défense et de sécurité de temps à autre, ça sera des mines antipersonnelles improvisées qui vont exploser, soit ça sera des mines antipersonnelles improvisées qui ont été découvertes et détruites, ce qui revient à dire qu'au regard de la nature du conflit, on a affaire ici à un déminage dynamique. Donc, il serait difficile de venir dire que telle zone, elle est minée, on va faire des marquages et venir à une période X donnée pour aller déminer. Voilà. Nous n'avons pas le luxe de le faire dans le cadre des conflits que nos États, en fait, vivent. Donc, c'est ce que moi, je voulais apporter pour ne pas être trop long, étant donné qu'il y aura un point qui va traiter de cela. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Now give the floor to Professor Inchudanso from the Ghana Armed Forces Command and Staff College. After which we go to Mali. That will be the final question for the day. I'm sorry, we have to end the session, go for lunch, and come back. Then we'll continue. Thank you very much for your understanding.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I am a teacher and a researcher, and my contribution is a kind of contribution that I designed to let us have a refocusing of the problem. I think the whole emphasis on IEDs without definition has now been given a proper focus by the Article 2 that were shown. And for me, it encapsulates almost everything that we can subsume under the anti-personnel mines. wherever there is conflict, we're going to see more of this. There are several countries that didn't have this problem. Like our brother from Burkina Faso is saying, they didn't know this until quite recently when jihadism has been part of their body politic. Our brother from Ghana made it believe as if we don't have that problem, and we may not see that problem. A little research into the conflicts in Ghana will let you know that there are some devices that do not explode, but they are mines. In fact, the Alavanyo and Konya conflict, the Peki-Chito conflict, and other conflicts around that we see. Our small research shows that there are more devastating IEDs that are just metals, and they arrest you, they don't explode. So it's more killing than any other explosive device that may maim or injure you. And as most Ghanaians know the one I'm talking about. If you have such a situation, then you know that almost all conflicts are going to have these IEDs, and it's going to be a problem. My concern is that we must focus attention on upstream measures. I'm not saying that the downstream measures must be completely thrown away, but upstream measures, can we ensure that these things are not part of our lives at all? Because it's a developmental issue, as has been said. It's also a human rights issue, and it's a humanitarian issue. And if we don't tackle conflict from the conflict side, and we believe that we want to not prevent, but cure, it's going to be a problem, because globalization alone is helping us now improvise a lot. You don't need to go to school to be able to have an IED manufactured. You can just look at your phone and Google something, and you'll be able to put things together to become an explosive. My concern is that we must focus more on the preventive side than the curative side. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that intervention. And on this session, on that note, I want to close this session for us to go for lunch. I want to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers for their interventions, as well as all of you that have engaged in the discussion. We have been privileged to hear from esteemed experts in the field of humanitarian law, research, and disarmament on the pressing issue of improvised anti-personnel mines. The insight shared by our legal advisor from the ICRC, research specialist from the Landmine Monitor, and associate researcher from Unity have shed light on the multifaceted challenges posed by these weapons and the imperative for concerted international action. Their expertise has deepened our understanding of the legal framework, research, and methodologies, and policy implications surrounding improvised anti-personnel mines. As we reflect on the discussion held today, let us remain committed to advancing efforts to mitigate humanitarian impact of these indiscriminate weapons and strive towards a world free from their devastating effects. Thank you for your attention. Before we go for lunch, I would like to call Sophie to give us an announcement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Distinguished Excellencies, we are not going to release the panel members. The panel will reconvene after lunch to pick up from where because we realize some delegates still had their flags up. However, we are also mindful of time and the fact that the hotel is also waiting for us to proceed with the lunch. So the panel has not been adjourned. We will reconvene here for 30 minutes so we can take the rest of the interventions from the floor. If that is okay with you, we will reconvene here after lunch for 30 minutes and retake the session before. That said, we invite the Secretariat to give us an announcement before lunch, and then we will go for lunch. If the Secretariat is ready, Lila.
Good afternoon. The lunch will take place in 2 separate rooms. Some of you have received a white voucher. Look at the color, and the other one is a dark blue. So everybody who has the white voucher will go to the main dining room of the hotel. Okay? Everyone who has the blue voucher, as you exit, you go left. Please follow the persons from the commission will guide you to which side of the hotel. So you exit, go straight as if you were going towards the pool. Before you exit the hotel, you go left if you have the blue voucher, or you go right if you have the white voucher. And I think that is, if you do not have a voucher, then we'll work with you and we'll get you one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the session is adjourned. We'll reconvene here at 2:30. Thank you very much.